Hello, you wonderful people, and welcome to another episode of Not Too Comic Book. This being a show where it's about TV shows that are adaptations of comic books. For today's episode, I'm going to talk about the latest episode of The Boys, a great episode. A lot of really interesting things went down in this episode, so let's break it down. First and foremost, we have that opening. That whole situation is like, oh, we should stop this guy, but it's like, oh, the judicial system, he's just going to be out. So it's kind of like, why don't we handle this our way? And while Stormfront's feeling Homelander up, he's crushing that dude's head. And then immediately after he crushes his head, it's literally as he's getting off, he crushes the dude's head. And then immediately they proceed to have sex near his dead body, putting blood in each other's mouth. I'm like, this is the most effed up thing. We got the most I said it last time, the most despicable beings in this series literally got together, and how messed up and jacked up that is. It resonates so much at the end as well, but their story is the most fucked up love story you've ever seen. It's crazy. It's wild. But we'll get to that soon enough. But I thought it was so interesting how that whole situation was handled, especially because she's like, it's like, oh, they're on TV, like during an interview, and then Kimiko and Butcher look at each other and they're like, they're fucking. And then like Kimiko nods, like, yeah. It's like, and I thought that was so beautiful. Literally the two people they hate the most in the world are on TV together. And it's just like, now you find out the two people you hate most are together, and it's just like, ugh. There's a whole situation with Starlight getting the tracker pulled out, and I love Frenchie being like, no, it's okay. He's like, I get it. You've had entrails and guts all over you, but obviously it's a lot harder when it's someone you love. And he looks at Starlight, and Starlight's like, he's like, no, I don't. I mean, he's like, not that I don't. It's like, it's platonic, and it's just like, let's get this done. Which is a lot to say, like why Huey would have a hard time with blood. I mean, all the times they end up with like blood and guts over them. Especially, let's not forget, the first blood and guts he ever had on him was his girlfriend Robin. So obviously, because he cares about Starlight, so it's kind of almost a similar thing, seeing her hurt or whatever. So the blood splatters on his face, so that's enough to probably send him into spiraling down a lane of PTSD on its own, right? Because let's not forget, Huey hasn't properly dealt with his PTSD because he has some severe PTSD. But nevertheless, they were able to get the tracker out. Immediately, my brain was like, are we going to find out there's actually another tracker, another means of how they track it? Probably is the only tracker, but I'm just thinking like, it just seems like there might be more to that, but who knows? Nevertheless, they come back to the hideout, and Starlight's, this is your hideout? He's like, and he was like, oh, it's got its charms. Like, the rats are kind of like Pokemon with Hep C, and she's like, oh god. And then Butcher's like giving her such a hard time. It's like, because despite everything, like his prejudice against soups, like I said, like we learned a little bit from his aunt last episode. I think this has to deal with his brother Lenny. I think it was a soup that killed his brother or whatever. He seemed like he was so okay, but maybe it's the thing of he needs other people around him to make him okay. He had Becca, so he was okay. So, but it just seems like, but maybe it is just simply because he spent years with Mallory taking down soups and stuff like that. He's always had the target of going after Homelander, so maybe in his mind it's like, Homelander's a piece of shit, so all supers are a piece of shit, so it stems from there. Or maybe it does run deep, because once again, we still have not got that story on what happened to Lenny, so maybe it's connected, maybe it's not, because even if it's not directly connected to soups, it's something that runs so deep inside of Butcher, that hate, that anger. I mean, even from the story his aunt told us last episode, how deep that anger kind of runs into him when it comes to the people he cares about. He can, that anger can kind of take control of him. He can lose himself in it, so he just found a new target for his rage, and it ended up being not just Homelander, but all soups, So obviously he's kind of treating Annie like crap, which is kind of messed up considering all that she's done. She helped out she literally helped save everyone last season. When you weren't there for them, she was, so that's a little effed up. But also she's been doing all she can to help you guys take down Vought, so it is kind of messed up from the treater, because it's kind of like, oh yeah, like because even Hugh is like, wait, you want her to come with us? It's like, yeah, because with the information she provided us, also when we go there, we might as well, when you're going in this shark infested water, might as well bring Chum. And it's like, oh, that sucked to kind of refer to her just simply as like, oh yeah, she'll be the bait that the sharks end up devouring. I was like, that's super effed up. Even to the point when he had the gun locked and loaded, like he was keeping an eye on them as Annie was walking back, he clicked the safety off. I'm like, what the fuck are you doing? Why would you even do that? Why would you even be tempted to kill her? She's done literally nothing to you. She even talked about the fact is that you shot her, but he's kind of like, But it's like, why would that? But I think he had to fight his instinct because it's like, oh, there's a super predator, I gotta kill him. It's like, you can almost see the parallels between like Stormfront's hate. It's not the same thing, but I mean, it's still a bigotry in its own right, because it's like you hate someone because of who they are, because of like, it's similar, but it's not the same thing. But you can see parallels between like the Homelander and Stormfront thing, and compare it to what's his face, Butcher. And I thought it was so interesting because Annie was like, yeah, your bigotry and everything, it's like, you won't even touch my hand. And she's like, you're just saying, you remind me of certain someone called Homelander. And Huey was like, stop, because he knows how much that's a trigger, because it's like, don't compare him to Homelander, the man that raped his wife, that's done all this terrible stuff. Like, obviously Annie doesn't know the ins and outs of Butcher's story, and I was almost expecting it to come out, but eventually maybe she will find out like why he has such a hard on for like Homelander, and why he wants Homelander dead, and why he kind of has the prejudice against Supes that he does, so that's a whole thing. At the same time, there's a whole situation, because obviously they're here in the first place because it's like, all right, because she saw the emails, because this was with Stan Edgar, and it's like, all right, so with that all said and done, with Stan Edgar like having reports about this hospital, so they go there, they're sneaking in, because I even love Frenchie being like, because obviously he's got beef with Kimiko, because Kimiko flips him off and everything, and I love that, like, and she sees Annie and hugs her, because she's like, because it's like, you came to help, you basically helped save me, so I remember you, you're good. But you could see Frenchie a little annoyed, because it's like, oh, you're gonna hug her, you're gonna be good with her, but me trying to help you, okay. But I love that she got some bling from like her hit jobs, and he's like, yeah, no one's gonna believe you're an orderly, and she just blows on it and wipes it on her shirt. I was like, that's such a dick move. So they're at odds, and this is so interesting because you've never seen them be at odds, but they're in there with Mother's Milk, and it's kind of like, all right, lay down and pretend like you're a patient, and then Kimiko's not doing it, and she looks at Frenchie and tilts her head for him to do it. He's kind of like, all right, fine. And so they get in there, and then we see that this whole hospital is filled with soups, and almost even they're jumping there like, oh, are they making soup terrace? I was like, what the hell is this place? But immediately looking at some of them, I was like, is this supposed to be like failed soups or something? And it turns out that is the case, but we'll get there soon enough. But I love the fact is, there's that one dude and Mother's Milk is like, God damn, brother's got a sausage on him or something, a big sausage on him or something, and it's this dude with a large dick. I was like, oh my God, that's holy shit. But now it's, it's like Stormfront shows up. She's in there with the orderly the nurse we saw her talking to last episode. And I thought it was so interesting, like, as she's dealing with that, and it's like the guy doesn't want to work, like the guy's, using his powers, but he's like, honestly, I want to go see my sister. And they're like, no, in time. He's like, you know what? Forget that, screw your test. And Stormfront's like, okay. And then Home Dude burns him, and it's revealed, because they were looking like, hey, doesn't he look familiar? And it turns out he's Lamplighter. And I kind of got that spoiled for me just because I was looking up something last episode, and I saw a picture of Shawn Ashmore, like, from that last week's episode, and whatever text was with it was saying Lamplighter. Like, I don't know whether that was something that was already, like, I don't know what it was. Maybe some people had already figured it out or something. But it's kind of a spoiler, but kind of not, because I wasn't sure whether that was it turned out to be legit. But regardless, it's still fine. It's not that big of a deal. I would have loved having gotten that reveal, but I mean, it's still a nice reveal regardless. Especially because it sends Frenchie spiraling a little bit, because it's like, we got to kill him. We got to do this. And it's so interesting because I think this made Kimiko see him in a different way, because I think in Kimiko's eyes, because later on, like, Frenchie's losing his shit, like, he's slamming and throwing stuff, and he's just like, he's so angry. I think Kimiko, like, when you look on her face, because I think for once she's never seen Frenchie like that, she's never seen him that angry, but I think it also makes her see like, oh, you're like me, like, she has all this pent-up anger towards Stormfront, so when she sees him like that, I think she, because I think that's why she resonates with the boys, because each of them kind of, I mean, especially because, obviously, Butcher's got his thing about Homelander, so I think that's why she kind of finds kindred spirits, because, I think that's why she was sitting with Butcher too, but also, like I said, I think it makes her feel like, oh, so you do understand what I'm feeling, like that anger you're showing, like you have it inside you too. So like I think she is starting to see, because she probably felt like, you don't understand me, you don't get it, you'll never understand, but it's like, no, you actually do. I think that look on her face kind of showcased that. But obviously they got all the drives, they were trying to get out of there, but Lamplighter saw Frenchie because he kind of recognized him and shit, and it's like things pop off. but Frenchie doesn't immediately pull the trigger. It's interesting to learn it because I was curious. I was like, what is Lamplighter's power? And so basically, which is so interesting, and maybe that's why they did this. Because once again, I brought it up before, Shawn Ashmore was in the X-Men movies. Who was he in the X-Men movies? Iceman. So for him to have fire powers, it's like, they had to do that on purpose. That had to be on purpose casting, because it's like the opposite. It's like, oh, you're playing an opposite character to who you were in X-Men. It's like two different comic book properties. So there has to be like that had to be like on purpose. They did that. There's no way that was done by accident. It would have been even interesting if they actually got his brother to do it, because he played Iceman. Get his brother Aaron to play. It would have been even like, whoa, that's crazy to think about it. I'm going on a tangent. I just thought that was just such an interesting casting when you break it down. But it's interesting knowing, like, obviously his power is fire. Like, he needs a source of fire, and I never really realized that's how Starlight's power worked too until this episode. I was like, oh, I didn't know you needed sources of, like, it's one of those things where her power comes from like her draining the nearby. So like, I thought it kind of amplified her powers or something. It just never correlated to me. I mean, I guess it's kind of like the same thing as like Superman needs the sun. Well, Superman and Supergirl need the sun to go all super, so it kind of makes the same. I mean, it's just like Green Lantern needs like the recharge Green Lanterns in general need to like recharge the ring. Like, it never correlated in my head that like, oh yeah, you need the source. In Starlight's case, she would need like light as a source, and it's not just like regular light. She needs like artificial light. Like, her powers kind of siphon on artificial light, because I'm like, it's sun, but not unless you can make the argument maybe it's like cloudy, so she doesn't get the direct sun. Once again, that's kind of like it was just something that was crossing my mind. I didn't really think about it at the time, but regardless, sadly, what ends up happening is, shit starts kicking off, and it's like, wait a minute, Cindy gets out, and then she's like, oh, they're like, no, we're not friends with him, but it's like, you're dressed like him, and she's like, I don't like liars, and she gets shot in the back, and she kills a guard. They didn't comment on this, but it's like, that's exactly how Raynor died, so they must have gotten Cindy out, they must have let her out and about, and they knew like, okay, we need to shut Raynor down. So it's like, oh, we got a suit that can handle that. Let's get Cindy, because she can, attack from far away. So it's like they're running for their lives, and I don't know what you call that ability. It just I don't know like the proper name for an ability like that, because it's not telekinesis necessarily. But like she can crush things. I don't know what you'd call that psychic ability. Regardless, they've all kind of got to work together. Initially, Lamplighter's like, no, I'm not going to work with you guys. But then it's kind of a thing of like the acid dude shows up. Kimiko ends up, knocking him down and scamping on him. And he ends up burping on himself and ends up burning his own face off. And Lamplighter's like, all right, we could go. Because it's kind of like, we need to kind of work together and get out of here. So these mortal enemies having to work together. And I think it's interesting because like the entire episode, and I brought this up before, it's so neat that we are getting a little more insight into the boys, because we learned about Mother's Milk situation, his father's situation. We learned more about, Frenchie. Like, for him growing up in the shelter that he grew up in, the only good thing from that place he had was the Golden Girls. They were kind of like something he could latch on to. So he ends up having his buddies. He has his pal and also Sherry, and it's like, we're the Golden Girls. It's like, you're Blanche, you're Dorothy, and it's like, who are you? Are you Betty White? He's like, fuck yeah, I'm Betty White. So obviously doing this criminal thing. Then we learn about how he met with Mallory because he got arrested. And I thought it was so interesting because, like, this whole aspect about Frenchie doing what he does, finding out the weaknesses of heroes, like, we learned, like, he was able to take down someone named Behemoth who uses their power, their rage as their power, but it's like you were able to docile them with, like, powdered Xanax inside of a bomb or something like that. So it's like, at this point, that's why Mallory recruited him, because it's like, oh, you're very good at taking down superheroes, finding their weaknesses, It's not an easy thing. Hence the whole trying to take down Translucent situation last season. But I thought that was so interesting, learning that inside of like, oh, he was kind of blackmailed into working, because it's like, if you don't help your two pals, the people that are most important to you will be sent to like a supermax prison. So then we, kind of fast forward to like 5 years ago. Obviously, Mother's Milk is going to propose to his girl, and they're so happy for him and everything. But then Lamplighter shows up, and I love that they're all laughing at him. Because, like, even Mallory's laughing at him because he looks so stupid. And you're like, what are you laughing at? It's just like, you look like such a jackass, just like how you're dressed and everything. And I love that situation. And so obviously they're blackmailing him. We never actually got to find out what dirt they had on him. But even Mallory was like, I don't like this. Frenchie followed him. And it's like, okay. But then Frenchie got caught up with this situation. Because I thought this was such an interesting insight because, like, the back and forth between them. Because obviously for Frenchie, he's trying to figure everything out. He's like, why didn't you ever tell the Seven about us? Like, the Seven come after people who come after them, right? Because an attack on one is like an attack on all of them. But Homelander never came after us. Months underground, you never came after us. No one ever came after us. Why? Oh, because you didn't tell them. But why? Because I was like, why didn't you? And it turns out because he didn't mean to kill Mallory's grandkids. For him, it was a complete another accident. Because he's like, oh, you burned them and you wanted to stand over. He's like, no. Because it was supposed to be Mallory in that bed. He didn't know it was going to be her grandkids. And by the time he did it, it was already too late. So he's been living with that. So he does feel guilt over what he's done. Even though, like... Because it ends up getting revealed that obviously they're not making super terrorists, they're making other superheroes. These are failed experiments, and if they're unusable, he's sent in to burn them. Can't have any evidence around, right? I mean, because I think for him, he's a surefire way to, well, no pun intended, surefire way to end up disposing of any evidence. Plus, it's a good, clean, well, because they're not full superheroes. They're kind of like, that's why they're like them, because you want something more perfect. Because that's also been a conversation, like, can you choose what abilities you get? It seems like it's kind of a luck of the draw thing, but obviously we see, like, the more, like, misfit abilities, I should say, like Home Dude, who vomits acid. But regardless, it turns out they're trying to make because once again, we're not necessarily in the superhero business, as Edgar said. We're in the pharmacy business. And if you can perfect Compound V, oh my God, anyone could be a superhero. I mean, for one, that would boost their reputation. Because like all these different superheroes we can pull in. But also, with Compound V being out and about, it's like, but now you give people the opportunity. It's like, hey, you want to be a superhero? You can be a superhero. And that could turn into a whole thing. Obviously, you probably have millionaires bidding like, oh my God, give me that Compound V now. Let me get some superpowers. From a pharmaceutical standpoint and even from a superhero standpoint, Vought would just raise in value and just become an even bigger conglomerate and monster that they are, I think that's potentially a route they could end up taking this down. But along with the lamplighter situation, we did learn from Frenchie, like, what happened that night. We got more insight because, lamplighter was like, why did you were following me? He's like, you were following me that night. Why did you disappear? And even Mother Smoke is like, I want to know. I'm curious about it too. And Frenchie finally opens up about what happened. His friend was dying at the same time. And Sherry's like, you need to get over here now. And it's like, your friend's ODing. So he runs back. And he, resuscitates him, but then he immediately has to go back because it's like, I got to go after Lamplighter. And Sherry's like, fine, if you got to go, if you want to go, then go. So kind of guilting him a little bit. And the dude's like, Sarge. And he's like, don't worry, like, I'll be back. It's like, because these are the most important people to him at the time. So it makes me wonder, does Sherry hold some animosity against him? Because remember, she's the one that kind of threw it in his face last time, being like, oh, you want to save Kimiko because you think it's going to make up for the fact that Mallory's kids got burned. And it's like, because we end up finding, because even Lamplighter asks us, like, this friend of yours, did he survive? And it's like, no. Well, yes, he survived, but that night was the last night I saw him, because I think Frenchie leaving made him go like, oh, you don't care about me, and he bounced. And a few months later, he died of another overdose. And even Mother's Milk is like, why didn't you tell us? Like, we've literally laid this out, this blame on you the entire time. We've put you on the hook for this, because he's like, what would have changed? Why would I want to be off the hook? Because for him, he feels like he failed everybody. He failed the people that were important to him, but there's other group of people that were important to him, because it's like, Mallory's grandkids died because of me. A friend of mine, I failed. I wasn't there for him. It's like him being split both. So for him, he feels like, I deserve that blame. I deserve every bit of it, and it's like, that's so interesting, learning that that's what Frenchie's whole deal is too. Like learning like why the whole Mallory and Lamplighter thing went down the way it did. I was like, damn, dude. And he's been carrying that guilt this entire time. I thought that was so interesting. And it kind of brings this interesting, complicated thing of like him and Lamplighter, because both of them feel guilt over what happened. Like Lamplighter didn't want things to turn out that way, and Frenchie obviously didn't either. But like I said, it makes you wonder, does Cherry like hold some animosity for him on that account. Like her throwing the lamplighter thing in his face, especially considering what was going on that very night. It is kind of messed up, you know? But obviously they've been together this entire time. But like, that's why, maybe that's also the thing too, because for Sherry, it's kind of like maybe that's why they don't have the relationship that they once had, you know? Maybe being around her too much, you know, because Kimiko was supposed to be his second chance of like, hey, I saved you. Maybe I can make up for some of the stuff I've done. So, but maybe being around Sherry's a constant reminder of that. Maybe he's at that place where maybe he's starting to potentially find a way to be like, maybe I can be forgiven for what happened. And when it's all said and done, I'll get to the Stormfront and Homelander stuff soon enough. But obviously they're trying to get out of there. You know, Frenchie's using his weapon that he made, but it doesn't work against Cindy because she crushes it. Lo and behold, lucky for them, Stormfront shows up and she's looking for Lamplighter. But rather than selling them out, he didn't, because it's kind of like, no, after what I did, this is, in his own way, I think this is his way of kind of making penance. So he kind of makes an excuse of like, yeah, what ended up happening? Wrong dosage. Cindy ended up getting out, freeing other people. Shit went wrong. Stormfront's like, all right, fine, I'm going to check the place, you know. Lamplighter covered for them when he didn't have to. So that kind of presents a very interesting and complicated thing. At the same time, you know, everything going down outside, there's the dude that ended up, he's a kid that's free. He's like, I'm scared. I don't want them doing what they did to me. And they're like, no, we're all friends here. It's all good. He acts either just out of nervousness or just because his powers are imperfect. He ends up releasing it. And the truck gets spun and the van gets spun and Huey's in the back, but they're like, they go check on it. And I think that's a beautiful thing that both of them meet, like, Huey, because they both care about him. And they open up, it's like, Huey, you okay? He's like, yeah, I'm fine. Look down, he's got a piece of metal sticking out of him. It's like, well, shit. And she can't cauterize a room without any light, so it's like, we got to get out of here, we got to get it. And seeing Butcher freaking out like that, because I think when Butcher does see Huey, he does see his brother, like, oh, I got to protect you. So he goes into mama bird mode. Once again, that is his canary after all. And so it's a whole situation of them getting to the highway. And then, you know, it's like, hey, buddy, I'm FBI. Could you get out the car? Dude's like, and what was interesting, and I thought this was such an interesting line, he's like, you guys aren't American. You're trying to say, like, how can you tell my FBI, you're not even American, which I thought was kind of interesting. Part of me was wondering, is like, is that supposed to be kind of like a nod to everything that's going down, like the way, like, it's gotten very, like, America, 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 you know, like with everything kind of rallying up. Maybe not. Maybe I'm reading too much into that, but it's just like, I mean, I think it's more so because it's like, oh, you're not even American. Like, I mean, I'm actually curious. Can you be in the FBI and not be American? I don't know that, because obviously that came up because that's what he was saying last season, that he was FBI and stuff like that. But I'm like, I'm actually curious in the grand scheme of things. Could you be part of the FBI if you weren't American? Like, if you came and got, like, a green card in the States and stuff like that, could you be able to do that? Like, your residence being in the States and stuff. I'm just curious. I thought that was kind of... I never really thought about that before. Regardless, the guy pulls a gun, Butcher pulls a gun, Starlight's trying to defuse the situation, things escalate, and bam, she blasts a dude, and he's dead. And something that clicked in my head is, like, this is the first time Starlight's ever killed anyone. Like, she doesn't bring it up. Butcher it doesn't come up in conversation. That's the first time she's done, and I brought that up before, like how this has been a season where she's done a lot more stuff that she had never done before, that it kind of skewed everything. So it's interesting that, you know, like more and more shady stuff, you know, very stuff that she would have never been okay with before. Now she's had to kind of, you know, do a lot of morally gray stuff, you know? I mean, and in some cases just bad stuff, but it's like, all right, you know, I got the light, let's cauterize the wound for Huey, we got to get him to a hospital. And obviously, you know, for Annie, it's that situation of, don't look at me like we're the same. We're not. Because you're giving me that look of, like, you know, approval. Because he's like, you know, you did what you had to do. She kind of talks about the fact of the matter is doing all this stuff, how it's pushed her to do stuff that, you know, it's kind of have no choice. But don't give me that look like, oh, you approve. It's like, no, I'm nothing like you. But I think, you know, Annie's also worried, like, but what if I am becoming more like you? All the stuff I've had to do. Luckily, they were able to get Huey to the hospital, and he was taken care of. But I do love the whole, like, them basically joking and shitting on Huey about, you know, it's like, oh, he's got that kid's shampoo in his hair, and the stuff that he scrubs on his butt. And I love Annie being like, I don't need to know that. He's like, he's just fucking mental. But they're kind of bonding a little bit, and I think it's kind of a nice moment they're having. It's nice because she bonded with MM, and now she's doing it with Butcher. But it's also the thing because these are the people that care the most about Huey. And even, it's like for Annie, it's like he's such a good person, and it's like he's too good for either one of us. And even Butcher was kind of like, yeah. And I was like, I thought that was just like I said, like they're kind of put their differences aside because they care about Huey so much. And I like him being that linchpin and kind of strengthening their bonds and making, because this could be the second soup that, I'd say make the argument this is the second soup that Butcher's ever, looked at it as not an enemy. Because obviously Kimiko now, Annie. So I think that was kind of a nice direction for their story. I'd skipped over it, but I should focus on the fact is because Frenchie brings it up later on, and I thought this was amazing. Where Frenchie was like, "Yo, tell Butcher about that dick that was around your neck," because home dude, the moment it went around him, I was like, "Is that an arm?" I was like, "Wait, is that dude's dick?" And then you look at it beside Mother's Milk's face, and it's the tip of his penis. I was like, "Oh my god, that was his penis!" And then it rolls back up, and then and you have Mother's Milk being like, "That was his fucking dick," and Frenchie's like, "Oh, come on, don't be so close-minded," and bringing it up, about bringing it up. Oh, tell Butcher, and Mother's Milk is like, "Fuck you." No, that's just Frenchie. No, that's not. That's Frenchie being Frenchie. But I did like that moment between Frenchie and Kimiko because he ends up being like, I wanted to save you to kind of absolve me of my sins, but he's like, no one can absolve me of my sins. So he's like, you never asked me to save you, so I'll leave you alone. But obviously in that moment when Stormfront had showed up again, Kimiko was kind of losing it a little bit. Obviously Mother's Milk the first time was trying to calm her down, and then obviously, like I said, it's a mixture of anger, but also I think a little bit of fear because I think obviously she's traumatized, but I don't think it's full blown I'm ready to rip her head off, but I think it's also there's a bit of her that is scared too because it's like she's traumatized. It's like, you're the one that killed my brother, and I couldn't do anything to stop you. You beat me. You killed my brother. Like, what if But him touching her hand, but Frenchie being like, "I'll leave you alone," and I think that's what Kimiko needed, like him to now realizing that there's more to it because she wanted to say something but she couldn't, But I think for her it's kind of like I think she wants to tell him, "No, it's okay," because I think they're at the point where they understand each other more. It's like, yeah, you might not be able to communicate, but I think the relationship is about to grow because they do. It's the point where she knows more about him, and he recognizes yeah, I've been handling this whole thing. You never asked me to save you, so I'm not in any place to save you. You can't absolve me of my issue, so I shouldn't be using you as a means of trying to save myself to a certain extent either, So I think that understanding is going to lead to obviously the relationship growing, and I think eventually she will teach him the language, So I think that's going to be an interesting story point we potentially see. But obviously they call Mallory, and Mallory wants to kill Lamplighter, and it's like, oh, because obviously for Frenchie he's like, I know I wasn't welcomed at the funeral, so this is because I thought about it at the time. I was like, Frenchie's the only one that hasn't met with Mallory this at all since all that went down, right? Well, I was going to say Mother's Milk too, because the only person that's met with her all these times, obviously Huey met her at one time, but it's always been Butcher who's been the in-between. So this is the first time, but he's trying to add his condolences, but it's like, show me. And it's like, why isn't this man restrained? And it's like, no. He's like, I came here myself. It's like, she's like, I thought this was over, but it'll never be over. And he's like, that's why I'm here. Put both of us out of our misery. You kill me, it'll free you of everything, and it'll free me. But Frenchie was like, I'm going to plead for his life because this won't do anything for you. You getting revenge, it won't bring back your grandkids. It won't ease the pain in your heart. And also killing him, all that's going to do is give him exactly what he wants, because letting him live is much more nothing you can do to him is more punishment than he's already punishing himself. So it's like, what do we do? I think they're going to keep him. He's going to be the linchpin in trying to take down Vlad, exposing everything that they've done. I think that's where he's going to play into all of this. I think that's going to be where his story point goes. But another thing in this episode was Queen Maeve in the Deep. And I was like, because I was wondering, how is the Deep going to help? And then he shows up and it reveals what he was up to for her. I was like, oh my God, the plane situation. Because she was originally looking for the black box. But he was like, oh yeah, I had some of my allies looking into it, but they ended up finding a phone of someone who was recording that day. So, it's like you went back into 7, you don't say anything to anyone about this, but then A-Train runs into the Deep after the A-Train was with Ashley, and that dude is spitting that song, which I will admit, I think that song's kind of dope, especially because you hear a longer version of it at the end of the episode. It's actually kind of pretty dope. I'm like, that's kind of a banger, dude. But the fact of the matter is, A-Train is still dealing with like the not part of the 7 situation. And then I love that at one point he walks by Stormfront and she looks so disgusted, and it's just like, but then the Deep is like, hey man, because I didn't love that look on A-Train's face, like, because I think it's so interesting because the Deep is the biggest loser of the 7, and sadly I think in A-Train's mind it's like, yeah, I might be a loser, I'm not the Deep, I think he tries to hold himself still above that, but it's like, you need help, and so it's like, because some people had speculated wondering whether A-Train kind of being down on its luck would get folded into the church, so A-Train, Deep takes A-Train to meet Alistair, and it's like, they're talking a little bit. And obviously the Deep is kind of like, I feel like A-Train sabotaged me every part of the way, to the point I wanted to drown you over and over again. But he's like, I don't want to feel like that anymore. I want to be clean. So it's like, he's completely seduced in all this. And obviously the numbers behind it and stuff like that, being like, oh man, your percentage with women has gone up a little bit. He's like, oh, I'm just happy. Oh, so-and-so, oh, she's great too. She had called the person or whatever had complimented him, and he was like, oh, she's a sweetheart or something like that. But then as A-Train was leaving, Alistair's like, no, we get it. Like, your whole situation, it's like your heart, all the stuff that you were involved in. And A-Train's like, well, did you tell him? And it's like, that shows you that the church has connections. Now, what those connections are, who knows? It's so interesting that we have these two powerful organizations. It's like the church is low-key powerful because they have the information they have. Because it's like, what's your entire deal? Because it's like, what's that whole, like... Because once again, I guess it's power and influence. Because if you could get A-Train a part of your church, that means at least 2 people you potentially could have in the 7 that could be your influence. Because I guess that way you get them spreading the church's word even more, get even more people in, so the church can grow more and more powerful. That's what I'm assuming the route is. But obviously, it's like, come on, sit down and hear out, the Deep's truth and stuff like that. So I'm like, where's that going to go? Now that, to me, if A-Train becomes a part of the church, that's going to turn into an interesting situation, because like, obviously the dirt, Starlight has over him, he might go to the point like, no, I've let it all go. Actually, I told the church everything there is to know. Or maybe he might become like, admit his fault when if he potentially returns, if he becomes like the Deep and gets so entrenched in all this. Because at first he's like, no, this isn't for me. But once again, you can make the argument about the Deep being an idiot, hence, which isn't a takeaway from people who get seduced into cults, because it's like, they come at people when they're in their most vulnerable state. A great example of that would be, the Deep and A-Train. But once again, it doesn't help that the Deep's kind of the idiot that he is. But at least in A-Train's case, he was like, no, I don't believe. But it's like, no, like, you're at your lowest at this point in time. Because they also brought up the fact that he's super in debt as well. So he needs all this to kind of work out. So, but I think either he's going to be like, I need to be honest, Vought, I'm going to tell you the truth. Starlight's been working with yada, 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 because obviously Stormfront hasn't said anything because she doesn't want her business out there. So it's like, that's why she hasn't acted. But obviously that's what scared Starlight, because it's like, I don't know what she's planning. She's got so much kept to herself. Regardless, on top of all that, it's so interesting to see what that A-Train storyline ends up becoming if he does end up joining the church. Will he actually join? Will he not? That's a whole thing. But I thought circling back to the whole Maeve thing. Obviously, she's with Elena. Elena's like, "Where's your phone?" I was like, "Is this?" I was like, "Is this going to go where I think it is?" And she takes the phone off the charger because the phone is like connected to the camera, and I'm like, "Oh boy!" She plays a video, and it's like, "Oh boy!" And obviously, Maeve is like, "I'm sorry, but the fact of the matter is, this could be our out." That moment there, I was like, you dug your own grave by saying that, because she's like, we could, rather than immediately saying we could take this to CNN, she was immediately like, we could either use this against Homelander so he'll leave us alone. If he doesn't, I'll take it to CNN. The fact is that your first choice wasn't like, oh, that kind of speaks volumes that you're going to use it as blackmail rather than the truth. I think that speaks volumes to Elena, but also like, she thought she knew Maeve, especially like with Maeve back in her life. It's like, oh, you are the person I thought you were. Like, yeah, things might have been complicated, but it's like, yeah, you only because I think in her mind it's like, okay, you only became the way you did because you were trying to protect me from Homelander. But now it's like, wait, you're just as messed up as Homelander. Because it wasn't just Homelander who left that entire plane to die. Because remember, they spun it to be like, oh, this was an accident. So everyone believes it to be an accident, even her. So now it's like, wait, you were there? You could have done something? You left those people to die? And obviously, maybe it's like, I'm sorry, I was scared, Homelander and everything. But obviously, for her, it's like, no matter, even if it was Homelander, you still did what you did. It doesn't justify all that you've done. And she's like, why are you don't look at me like that. It's like, because in her mind, probably in Elena's mind, you're not the woman she thought you were, the woman that she once loved and still cares about. This changes everything, because now it makes her in her mind like, oh, probably kind of makes her have a bit of a Billy situation where it's like, oh, all superheroes suck. You suck. Homelander might be a monster, but you're a monster too. And that's such a shame, because like, it's that thing of like being a part of all of this, Maeve talked about it in season 1. That's why she eventually like opened up a little bit more of the Starlight, being like, I used to be optimistic like you, until like being a part of this whole thing, it breaks you, it changes you, it turns you into someone you don't even recognize. Starlight's kind of in that process herself, becoming a person she doesn't even recognize. But it's like in her mind, it's probably like, yeah, I got to do these things along the way with you guys, but it's like, did the ends justify the means? I mean, I still killed someone. Even she said it herself, like the first thing that came out of her mind was like, why did you have to pull the gun, you stupid fuck? Like that, she even said that immediately. That was like her first thought, So it's almost a thing of like, there was a part of her that feels bad that she kind of doesn't feel as bad about it as she thought she would, I think that's kind of what eats her away. Like, I don't have as much of a guilty conscience about it. I mean, once again, just kind of that steep, that, the road to hell is paved with good intentions type of stuff, But regardless, that puts a little snafu in that whole plan that they have, because now Elena's not going to look at you as the same way. Like, you're not going to have the happy ending you thought you would make. So that's definitely going to be interesting to see where that goes. Then let's finally circle back to the Homelander and Stormfront situation. I thought it was so interesting. He was like, oh no, I got a surprise for you. And she's like, no, it's good. She's like, I'll be back in 20 minutes. I got to meet with like some rep people. And obviously she went to the hospital. And he goes inside. He's got these flowers and everything. It says XO Homelander. It's like, oh my God. It's like, oh, you're like in love. It's like, oh shit. Like he's waiting for her and everything. But looking at the card more and more, because I think for him, he felt like, I'm a sap. Because he made that whole thing about how he doesn't need anyone, but now he's relying on her. And I think for him, either in between that time, he had already went to go check and see where she really was, because he went to go check on her. He talks about it later on. So either he did that in between before we got back to him, or that was before he burned it down. Because it might have been a thing of like, let me go check on her, and found out she wasn't there, then came back and proceeded to burn down the trailer. Because I don't know whether it was either that, or the fact is that it's like, oh, look at me, I'm so pathetic, I'm getting sympathetic, because he let someone like her manipulate him before that, being Madeline. So he's like, I'm letting my feelings for another person manipulate me again. It's like, I can't believe I'm such an idiot. Stormfront's like, hey, it's looking all over for you. He's like, well, I gotta go run lines and stuff like that. She's like, is there a problem? He's like, no, why would there be a problem? It's like, it's like he finds out like, oh, I checked, you weren't there. And she's like, I can explain. He's like, no. And he puts his hands around her throat. I was like, oh shit. And you had that look on her face. I was like, oh. And I didn't know how to immediately interpret that look as either, hey, I'm scared shitless because one of the most powerful beings on this planet is super pissed at me, or was it a thing of like, I actually do love you? Like, I was like, is this very reciprocal? Are you not just manipulating? Do you actually care about him? And obviously, when it's all said and done, she tells him, she's like, all right, I'm going to open up to you about this. It's like, here. It's like, oh, is that your grandma? It's like, no, that's my daughter. And then Homelander's looking at her like, how old are you? She's like, I was born 1919. So it's like, you are 100 years old. I was like, that's it. Because he was scaring the shit out of her at first, because he was like, you said that I shouldn't have to worry about it because you won't break easily. Almost like, let's see whether that's really true or not. I was like, oh, dude, this is about to get scary. But then she opens up the truth about it, and then she's showing off some pictures, and then it's like, you see the Nazi flag and everything, and you're like, oh my God. Because, like, obviously, like, some stuff I've heard from people, obviously, I've never read the comic book, but obviously, Stormfront in the comic book, spoilers if you don't want anything known about the comic book, Stormfront's character in the comic book is a dude. Not, obviously, for the show, they made the character a female. But also, what was interesting, though, is, like, the character, I don't know whether the character is outright a Nazi, because people say, like, because, like, someone, like, I don't know the character in and out, but I thought it was so interesting, because, like, obviously I knew she was racist, and I thought they were kind of pulling a little bit from that. I didn't know we were legitimately making, like, oh no, she is a full-blown Nazi. She was there back in the day. But also, she knew Frederick Vaught. Because the moment she was like 19, I was like, you're one of the first Compound V people. Which also, once again, shows you just like how long superheroes have been around. Like, I made a whole point when it's like, oh yeah, because back then he was working on what would eventually become Compound V. She was like, he gave me the first real injection. And for her, she wants Vought to go down a certain direction because she's like, so once again, we see where her ideology comes from. It's full-blown Nazi ideology, and it's like, holy shit. And then like someone had actually pointed it out, like how perfect Homelander is, because he's the poster child of what Nazis wanted. Oh, blonde, blue-eyed, and on top of that, superpowers. Oh my God, he's every Nazi's wet dream, and obviously it's a perfect fit considering Stormfront being the literal Nazi. It's not like, oh, you know, not only is she a bigot and racist, it's like, oh no, it makes sense because she's a legit Nazi. You know, it's like, holy shit, dude. Like, obviously it was there, but it's just like, I didn't expect it to actually, like I said, like, I don't know about the character from the comic book because people have described him as a Nazi. I didn't know if he was an actual legit Nazi. So for them to meet, like I said, expect her to be racist, kind of a shitty person. I didn't expect her to be a full-blown Nazi. That was interesting because not only are you like not only do you ride with the ideology, you were around for that birth of that ideology. It's like, that takes it to a whole new level. And for her, she talks about the fact is of like what we can do, like what they're working on and everything. All those soups that they have, like obviously they're trying to like perfect Compound V. We can have an entire army under us. That's what Vought should be, kind of like, you know, correct this world that's kind of messed up. So it's like, oh, she's on some like it'd be the Fourth Reich, right? Like she's on some like Fourth Reich shit. Like, oh, we're almost like we're gonna purify the world type of thing. It's like that's gnarly, dude. And like for her, it's like she lost everyone she's ever cared about, but she's like, but then I found you. We found each other, and it's like, look at you, you're perfect. This army we're gonna raise, you're gonna be the leader of it. He's a literal poster child, and I'm like, that's so crazy. And then they proceed to make out. This right there, the moment that they start making out, I was like, this is the most fucked up love story I have ever seen. And that says a lot because I consider James and Alyssa's relationship from the end of the effing world kind of fucked up, but it's almost effed up. It was beautiful in an effed up way. This is just straight up effed up of like, oh, once again, now the two most despicable human beings, once again, beings in general, are back on the same page, and like he's ready to, you know, lead the charge. But once again, this takes me back to the whole point. Edgar's been talking with her. Edgar's behind her being a part of, being a part of all of this, part of the Seven and everything. And I'm like, you are the head, you're the top dog at Vought. Why are you helping a literal Nazi? That's what blew my mind. It's like, you aren't someone she's down for. We see the way she treats A-Train and just any minority. So I'm like, why would you? That's what boggles my mind, because it's like, obviously you know who she is. Vought knows about her being Liberty. They know about her past and stuff like that. You know where she stands, like, or do you not? Like, no, Vought knows a lot. There's no way you don't know. So like, why are you letting her run rampant? That I don't get it, because that once again, it still confuses me, because like the whole like, oh, you let her run rampant, say whatever she wants to against Vought. Like, I figured that was a plan, because it's like, oh, you're gonna have everything kind of circle back around. She's gonna look into Vought, but like her ideology, her reason, like, that's why I'm like, is Edgar not who we think he is? Like, that's what I'm kind of confused. Not unless Stormfront thinks she's putting a veil over Edgar, even though, like, oh, for him, this might be all calculated. It has to be calculated, but I'm like, what are you getting out of this? Is he going to shift everything to be like, oh my God, look at these terrible people we have under us? So could this be his way of kind of wiping the slate clean by turning the Seven, maybe manipulating the situation into turning them into the villains? Maybe, I don't know. I just don't feel like Edgar would be fooled by like her thing. Like, so she might think she has him fooled, or I don't know what she is after. I mean, what he's getting out of this is what I was trying to, we now know what she's after, but it's like, I want to know what he's getting out of all of this. That's the crazy part. And I even love they play like the Golden Girls theme at the end of the episode while they're making out too. I was like, that's super messed up. This leaves your mind racing, being like, what is this all going to turn into? I don't know. Dude, we got like 2 episodes left of this season, dude, and I'm so excited to see where all of this ends up taking us going forward into the next episode. But really, that's all I want to talk about. Until the next time we meet, be happy, be safe, live life to the fullest, and enjoy it. Good day, and goodbye.